everybody, it's Sarah, and first of all, let's get a few obvious things out of the way first. Yes, I am back at home in my own flat. I feel comfortable at home again because the day before yesterday I did turn in my bachelor paper, which means now all that's left to do is wait and shake because I'm so nervous, but if everything goes well, fingers crossed, I'll have my bachelor probably at the end of October, because that's usually how long, like 1 month is usually the time that's given to the lecturers to like look through all the papers. So that's exciting. Also, I have a new haircut. I decided to get some bangs and I really like it. I actually like it more today than I liked it yesterday. I got them cut yesterday and I'm still learning to work with them, but I'm really happy in general. And also obviously the hair color is new as well. Although I'm not sure if it just looks black for you or if you can see that it's actually like a really dark navy blue color. But yeah, I love my blue hair. Also, I kind of feel like there's a disconnect going on today between my face and my clothes because I have my full face of makeup on again, which basically means eyeshadow and lipstick because I don't use foundation. I only use a bit of concealer sometimes. And that's really nice because I do enjoy working with my makeup and I need to stop fussing with my hair. I do enjoy putting on makeup, but then I'm in my home lounge hoodie because I noticed when I woke up today that it's finally cold enough again that I have to wear something warmer inside. And yeah, so I didn't want to take it off because I love this hoodie. It's like my favorite thing ever. But now, after this very long intro, let's get into today's video, which is my September wrap-up, my September reading wrap-up. And I did, as always, already do a mid-month wrap-up, which I will leave linked up there and down below, and I won't talk on my thoughts of the books that I already covered in that video because I do not want to repeat myself. So if you want to know my thoughts on what I read in the first half of September, you're going to have to watch that video. Now let's start with stats. I read a total of 12 books in September, which is kind of impressive considering that I finished my bachelor paper as well as 4 other exams as well. So I'm kind of proud of myself, not only in like a university regard, but in that regard as well. And those 12 books were all new to me. One was a YA book, all other books were adult. As for genres, I had 6 high fantasy, I had 2 classics, I had 2 retellings, I had 1 urban fantasy, and then 1 book that's just kind of generally speculative fiction, kind of alternate history, kind of steampunk, like that type of deal. And I came down to about a total of 4,500 pages read in September. Star ratings. Let's start with like the lower star ratings for once. I had 2 2.5 stars, I had 3 3 stars, I had 2 3.5 stars, I had 1 4 star, and I had a total of 4 5 stars. Just to kind of show you how crazy that is, so far I had a maximum of 1 5 star per month this year. I only had a total of 9 5 stars all in all, including September in 2020. So that means almost half of my 5-star ratings so far this year are from September, which is kind of amazing and kind of crazy. However, that still somehow only ended up averaging out to 3.75 stars, so I would have thought that it'd be like a bit closer to 4 stars, but well, I apparently calculated wrong. So now let's get into the wrap-up, and as always I'll start with my low rated books and end with my highest rated books. The first book I want to talk about is Baptism of Fire by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the 3rd or the 5th book, depending on where you put the short stories in the series and if you count them or not, in the Witcher series. And I know I've given a synopsis of this book a lot already in all my wrap-ups and TBRs, but let's do it again. The Witcher series follows Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher. That means he professionally hunts monsters and he has been alchemically, magically mutated to be better able to hunt monsters. Now his destiny is connected to Ciri, who is like this special young girl. I still don't know exactly what she is. I just know that she's the child of the Elder Blood, whatever that's supposed to mean. Now, I pretty much had the same problem with this book as with all the other books in the Witcher series that were in short story collections, and that is that it's just written in a way that's kind of not very readable. It's written in a way where you feel like it's building toward a big thing at the end, which is pretty typical for a series. However, usually in a series, you also have climaxes in each book. However, that's not the case here. And then there's also this little thing where a lot of times you're not part of the action and not part of what's happening in the book, but it's kind of then told in hindsight what happened to this or that character. Just like there's this king and he has this spy, and that spy told him what he found out about what happened at that place, instead of actually the book showing us what actually happened at that place. So it's just a lot of telling and not showing, and so far that's really bumming me out, but I still want to finish the series, as I'm always saying. Then next I want to talk about Path of Daggers, which is book 8 in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I think I did enjoy this more than book 7, or at least I had an easier time reading it than book 7. However, I'm getting more and more certain in my judgment that this series is really drawn out, and that it really doesn't need to be like 14/15, depending on if you count the prequel or not, books. And especially considering that there's random books like this in between where one of the main characters suddenly vanishes for the entire book and you have no clue what happened to him. And that's just kind of getting annoying, especially if it's characters that you find more interesting to read from, and so on. And every time I'm talking about one of these books, I'm thinking of a way I can summarize the series, but there really isn't a way. It's like a big fight against evil, Robert Jordan's take on the Lord of the Rings in a way that's like still pretty classic fantasy, but a bit more towards modern fantasy and like grey morality already and hopelessness, I guess. Then I want to talk about The Wolf of Odessa by K.S. Veloso, which is the first book in the Chronicles of the Bitch Queen trilogy or series, I don't know. But I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed by this book. This really was one of my anticipated releases of 2020. I finally got around to reading it. I thought I'd better read it now because at the end of September the second book was published, which also is on my October TBR still. But it just didn't live up to the series name. Like, if you call a series Chronicles of the Bitch Queen, I would expect the character to be like a bitch, but in a good way, like kind of taking no shit from anyone and just self-assertive and strong and just, you know, all the good characteristics of a bitch. However, our main character is the exact opposite of a bitch. She is whiny as fuck. And she kind of just, I don't know, she isn't self-assertive at all. Or if she is self-assertive, it's for the most stupid reasons ever. And I also couldn't really see the first book being like a development from her being like more unsure of herself to her being more self-assertive at the end, which I would still have loved, but it's not that. And anyway, before I continue on, let's talk a bit about what this is about. This series follows Talion, who has been crowned queen of her country after a civil war. And the deal was kind of that her and this person she married kind of reign together over the country, and they come from the two different factions that were part of the civil war. However, her husband vanished before he could be crowned. And so she has been reigning alone. However, one day after 5 years, she gets a letter from her husband asking her to come to this other country to kind of talk things out. And so she runs toward him, telling no one where she's going, taking only a small group of guards with her. And of course things get fucked up, so she ends up stranded in this other country that kind of doesn't like her people, and she's all alone. And I don't know, I just found her, for someone who apparently has been a queen for 5 years already, who has been kind of like educated to be a queen by her family because they knew she would become queen already when she was born. She just seems like someone who's really naive and useless, not gonna lie. And I did enjoy like the middle part, whenever her husband wasn't around and wasn't involved. But at the very beginning and at the very end, she just seemed like a bad version of a lovesick fool who doesn't care at all about her people and only cares that her husband left her. Which I would have loved some exploration of what that had done to her, but not to the point that she turns stupid and naive. And yeah, so I was kind of disappointed by this book. However, in between, I still enjoyed it enough that I gave it between 3 and 3.5 stars. And obviously, since I'm only talking about it now, I did enjoy it more than The Path of Daggers and Baptism of Fire. And I do want to at least read book 2 and see what I think about like our main character then. The next, I want to talk about the book that made me finish a series, which in August and September I finished a lot of series, which makes me really happy because that was, after all, one of the goals of 2020 for me. But the book is Empire of Ashes by Anthony Ryan, which is book 3 in the Draconis Memoria series. This series is set in a world where there's drakes, which are basically dragons, but like, they're drakes, they're called drakes. And you have these people called Bloodblessed who kind of like Elemences in Mistborn. When they burn metal, they get special powers. In this world, Bloodblessed, when they inject or drink dragon blood, they can get special powers. And depending on which dragon blood, like you have reds, greens, blacks and blues, depending on which dragon's blood you get different powers. Now at the beginning of book 1, there's this expedition setting out into this desert part of the world that has been kind of just like a mystery since forever, and they're searching for something. I think they're trying to find out what happened to this other expedition that had set out like years before. And so they discover some things, and the fallout of those things kind of is what book 2 and 3 deal with. I have to say, I cannot accurately say how much I enjoyed this book or how much I enjoyed the series as a whole, because I did let a lot of time pass between reading book 1 and 2 and then between book 2 and 3, and then I always didn't fresh up on what happened and I just kind of jumped into it, like jumping into cold water, and hoped I would understand enough to know what was going on. But the thing that I can say that I really enjoy is the setting. This is set in a kind of very steampunk world. So you do have steampunk type of machinery, you already have steamships, you have like pistols and cannons and all the type of stuff. And that's just really nice. I love steampunk. I also love that there's a huge corporate subplot like about this corporate company thing, because in this world at the beginning of the first book you kind of have a problem, because drakes, of course, because they're hunted for the blood, for the bloodblessed, they're kind of starting to go extinct, and the blood from drakes that aren't like in the wild but where you just breed drakes isn't as potent as the blood of wild drakes, and so you have the problem of that corporate world that is kind of just falling apart because the one product that it's built on, drake blood, is slowly running out. Kind of like us with oil when you think about it. And so I really did like that subplot as well. I also really liked one of the characters, Lisanne, who is like this female spy, and she's really badass and I really loved her. And so yeah, I would give the series overall 3 stars. It's a really enjoyable read. I might, if I ever have time in the future and if there's nothing that I want to read instead, I might try to reread the whole series one after the other. But overall, yeah, I enjoyed this read and I gave it 3.5 stars, and I thought it was a satisfying finale. Then I want to talk about Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This follows Yadiel, who wants to prove to his family that he's a brujo. He is a trans boy. And because of that, his family don't think he's a brujo because they still see him as a girl somehow, even though they accept that he's a boy, but they don't accept it like in his magic. Does that make sense? I hope it kind of makes sense. And so to prove that, he tries to summon the ghost of his cousin. However, he accidentally summons the ghost of the school bad boy who has been murdered. And so they try to find out what happened to the school bad boy, why he has been murdered. And also they try to find out what happened to the cousin, because those two mysteries might seem connected. And I overall have to say I really, really enjoyed this book. When I started it, not gonna lie, the writing felt really clunky. However, I started right after I finished another book that I want to talk about next, and that is The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And I think any YA reading it after The Lord of the Rings will like kind of read clunky and won't exactly read like the most refined writing style. Because that's just usually not what YA is, and that's just usually not what YA needs to be. So take that part with a grain of salt, that I can't really say how much my observation that it reads a bit clunky, at least at the beginning, really is true. I really liked Yariel as a main character, and I really thought in him as a trans boy character you could really see how important own voices is, because I thought there were a lot of things put into this book that were connected to him being trans and to his experience as someone who is trans, that I think only an author who experienced those things themselves would put into the books. So I really enjoyed those parts. I also really enjoyed Yadriel's relationship with his best friend as well as with Julian. I just thought it was really well done and really well developed, and my nose is itchy. And the only thing I have to say that's kind of negative is that the big plot twist at the end, I basically caught from the very beginning. And I don't know if it is because it's YA and YA tends to be more obvious than fantasy, or if it's just that I have read so many plot twists by now that I'm like, yeah, it's pretty easy to kind of know what's gonna happen. But it was like set up in the first few chapters, the plot twist, and when I read that I was like, well, that person's gonna be the bad guy, aren't they? It's like, this is what's gonna happen. I exactly called what the whole mystery was. So yeah, that was kind of like a bummer, but to be honest, I mostly read it for the relationships, so I didn't really read it for the mystery, so I didn't mind in the end, and I gave this book 4 stars. Then, as I just mentioned, I finally finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Woo! I can now call myself actually a fantasy reader. Can't I? Like, is that the bar? That's like the lowest bar, you have to read all of the Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I read The Return of the King, the 3rd book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and oh my god, I love this so much. I mean, there were spaces in between where it was like kind of dragging, but overall, J.R.R. Tolkien's writing is just so beautiful that it's just such a joy to read. Although I have to say that there were some things, especially in the battle, not of Osgiliath but Minas Tirith, that I enjoyed more in the films, because especially with battles, you just can't put that much into a book. It's gonna get boring very quickly. And J.R.R. Tolkien very much didn't put a lot of the battles into this last book, at least. I mean, there were some things, but it wasn't on the scale of the final movie. And also, like, the goodbye scene between Eowyn and Theoden, I just preferred in the movie, because in the book they don't really say goodbye to each other, but in the movie they do, and in the movie it really makes me cry, so I really preferred that in the movie. So yeah, there were some things where I would say, I did like that more in the movie, but that doesn't take away that this is still a 5 star. And then, lastly, I have The Shadowed Sun by Ankit Jemisin. This is book 2 in the Dreamblood duology, of which I read book 1 in August. And I loved the second book so much. I really enjoyed book 1. I gave it 4 stars. But man, the second book got me in all my feels. It just did everything I love in fantasy when it comes to cultures. So beautiful. And first let's talk about what this is about. This is set in a city that's like peace is precious above anything else. And so to be corrupt is the worst things ever. And you have those people called Daggers who, when they judge you corrupt, they come and they can kill you through dreams. And like dreams is a really big thing in this world. Through dreams you can heal, you can kill, and so on. And in the first book there's this thing called a Reaper, which means a gatherer who has kind of gone rogue. And the second book kind of deals with the fallout of book 1. Although I would say it's more of a companion than really a sequel. It's set 10 years after book 1, and you do have 2 characters that are recurring characters from book 1, but they only have very minor roles, and mostly you follow a completely new set of characters. Now I'm gonna probably do a whole review on the duology because there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but the main things why I loved these books are, first of all, the relationship. I love the relationship so much. It's like I read 2 relationships this month that made me feel things that I haven't felt in a very long time. The first was Gods of Jade and Shadow, the second one was this one. Then secondly, something that's just always better in books by authors of color compared to books by white authors, because authors of color just have to deal with that more, just from their own experience. But I loved the way like culture was set up in this book. Not even set up, but like dealt with, especially the friction between cultures, also the friction between cultures that are very similar. Kind of like in Christianity, you had like hundreds of years in Europe of conflict based purely because Christianity within itself wasn't united, and they had like 2 different options of what it's supposed to be. And so there's like a whole 30-year war that killed half of Germany off. You know, kind of that type of cultural conflict where you have 2 people who are very similar to each other, who have the same religion, but they kind of like do it differently. And then also kind of the way you have characters judging other cultures because they do not understand them, and then those other cultures judging the first culture on the same thing, like difference. And I really love those things. And then the last thing that made me so excited when I read that, I freaked out and ran around the flat because, listen, I have a problem when it comes to fantasy, and I'm gonna talk about this in my Let's Talk About Cultures in Fantasy Part 2 video, but let me just very quickly talk about it right now. And that is that even if you have different cultures, even if you have, let's say, I don't know, the Puppy War, Asian-inspired cultures, African-inspired cultures. Cultures aren't just the aesthetics. Cultures aren't just the religions. Cultures aren't just the like purely material things. Those are all important to cultures, and they kind of show the culture to the outside in a way. But in fantasy, even if you have like the aesthetic things and the philosophy things different, the structural things usually are still the same. Usually you will have a patriarchal or a matriarchal society, not even in the way it's understood in like anthropology and like non-judgmental terms, but like, ooh, the patriarchy is bad, yay, the matriarchy is good. And I do enjoy my matriarchal societies, don't get me wrong, I do love them in fantasy. But aside from those, you don't really play around with the structures, or you don't really get people playing around with the structures a lot. You will still have like nuclear family type cultures, or like bigger family style cultures, but usually the people will live together in like family units. And when it comes to linearity, which I won't explain right now, but you can Google it, like Google matrilinearity and patrilinearity. I will explain it a bit more in my Let's Talk About Cultures in Fantasy video, but this one has already been too long. But when it comes to linearity, which is a big part of culture and structure in culture, you will usually only get matrilinearity when it's a matriarchal society. And usually when it's a patriarchal society, you will get patrilinearity. However, this book has a patriarchal matrilinear society, which I freaked out. I love it so much. I nerded out to the nth degree, and yeah, I noticed that I really did study the right thing in that moment. That was amazing, and this is one of my favorite series of all time now, I'm pretty sure, and I really have to read more N.K. Jemisin. So, that was it for this video. That was all the books that I read in the second half of September. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts were on them. All the links to my social media, as well as my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, in which we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month, will be linked down below. And with that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!